There is a window behind the hotel manager's desk that looks out on bright daylight and green trees. A hallway runs along the wall behind it. Nothing could be on the other side of that glass, and yet the light pours through anyway. Almost no one notices. Almost everyone feels it. That window is one small piece of a larger trick. Stanley Kubrick built his 1980 film, The Shining, piece by careful piece, to feel like a dream a person cannot wake from. The way it moves, the way it sounds, the rooms that refuse to add up, the faces that double, the man who smiles in a photograph taken long before he was born. Every layer works the same quiet magic, turning fear into something with no clear cause and no way out. Welcome to Serial Soul. Let's begin. Section 1. The hallways that never end. A small boy rides a plastic tricycle through the empty halls of a hotel. He sits low to the ground, leaning into the turns, pushing the pedals as fast as his short legs will go. The wheels roar against the bare wooden floor. Then he crosses a thick rug and the roar drops away to almost nothing, just soft rubber rolling over wool. And for a moment the whole world goes quiet. He reaches more wood and the roar rushes back. Behind him, the camera holds steady the entire time, low and smooth, riding along at the height of his shoulders, never shaking, never falling back, turning each corner half a beat after he does. This is one of the first things most people remember about The Shining. Not a ghost, not blood. A little boy riding in slow circles through a building far too big for the three people living inside it. The odd thing is that nothing frightening actually happens. The boy simply rides, and yet the moment lodges in the memory like a bad dream, and the reason has almost nothing to do with the story, and almost everything to do with the way the picture moves. The film came out in 1980, and the man who made it, Stanley Kubrick, was already known for caring about tiny details that most directors ignored. For this movie, he wanted the inside of the hotel to feel wrong in a way that was hard to name. He found part of the answer in a brand new kind of camera that had been invented only a few years before. To understand why that camera mattered so much, it helps to know how movies were filmed before it existed. When a film crew wanted the camera to move across a room or down a hall, they had two main choices. They could lay down a set of metal rails along the floor, almost like little train tracks, and roll the camera along them on a small cart that gave a smooth picture, but it was slow to set up, and the camera could only travel in a straight, planned line. The other choice was for a person to lift the camera onto their shoulder and walk with it. That let the camera go anywhere, but every footstep made the picture bounce and jerk, so it always looked rough and shaky. A man named Garrett Brown changed all of that. He built a frame that a single person could strap to their own body, fitted with springs and weights that soaked up the bumps of walking. Someone wearing it could stroll, jog, climb stairs, even run, and the picture would stay as smooth as still water. His idea was so clever that the film world gave him an award for inventing it. Kubrick had seen what this new camera could do a few years earlier in a short test film, and he had written to Brown, saying he believed it might change the way movies were made forever. So when the time came to film the boy on his tricycle, Brown did not stand still and watch the boy go past. He moved with him. For the lowest rides, the ones that sit only inches above the floor, Brown sat in a wheelchair and was pushed along behind the boy, holding the camera close to the ground, gliding at the exact pace of the spinning wheels. The result is a strange feeling that is easy to sense and hard to explain. The camera is not watching the boy from a safe distance. The camera is traveling with him, locked to his speed, following him through turn after turn after turn, as if it were a quiet thing that had decided to come along. Then there is the sound, which carries just as much weight as the movement. As the boy rolls over the wood, the wheels make a deep rumbling roar that fills the whole space. The instant he crosses a rug, that roar cuts out, swallowed into silence. A few seconds later, he hits wood again and the roar returns. Loud, then nothing, then loud, then nothing, over and over, in a rhythm that never quite settles. A real hotel hallway would not switch between thunder and silence like that. The film makes the floor itself feel uneven and unsafe, even though the floor is doing nothing but lying there. What all of this builds, without ever pointing at it, is the feeling of being inside a space that does not behave the way a real place behaves. The hotel in the movie was not a real hotel at all. The whole inside of it was a set built inside a film studio in England. Kubrick had it made enormous on purpose, with long halls and big open rooms joined together in a way that let the camera keep traveling for a very long time before it had to stop. Because the camera could keep moving and moving without a break, the building slowly stops feeling like a building. It starts to feel like a place that has no edges and no end, where one hall pours into the next, and a person could ride forever and never reach the far side. The low height matters too. By keeping the camera at the level of the boy, the movie puts everyone watching down at his size. The ceilings rise up high overhead. The doorways tower. The hall stretches far ahead and shrinks into the distance. The world becomes the world of a small child in a huge place where the grown rules do not seem to apply, and where the only company is a camera floating along, just behind, always behind, keeping pace and saying nothing. There is something deeply familiar about this, even to people who have never thought about it. It is the way movement works in a dream. In an ordinary moment of waking life, a person walks down a hall, reaches a door, opens it, and arrives somewhere. There is a beginning and an end. In a nightmare, movement comes loose from all of that. A person walks, and the hall keeps going. They turn, and there is another hall. They hurry and never arrive. The body slides forward without much effort, pulled along by something, and underneath it all sits a low and certain feeling that they are not alone, that something is moving with them, matching them step for step, just out of sight. The Shining takes that exact sensation and builds it out of a tricycle, a smooth camera, and a floor that roars and falls silent. What makes the trick so strong is how calm it is. The movie does not jump out or shout. The boy is not screaming. The music for these long rides is often barely there or gone completely. The fear does not come from a sudden shock. It seeps in slowly, through the simple fact that the picture glides when it should bump, that the halls connect when they should stop, that the camera follows when it should stay put. By the time anything truly frightening appears later in the film, the unease has already been planted, quietly, in the way the whole place moves. This same gliding motion shows up again and again across the movie, not only with the boy. The camera floats through the lobby. It drifts down corridors ahead of the people, leading them as if it already knows the way. It eases around corners and into rooms, and near the very end, the same smooth, low, traveling movement returns outdoors, in a tall maze made of hedges, as the boy runs for his life through the snow at night, and the camera follows close behind him and behind his father, never stumbling, never slowing, gliding over the white ground as though the cold and the panic had no effect on it at all. The motion that felt almost playful when the boy rode his tricycle becomes the motion of a chase, and because the eyes have already learned that this gliding means something is coming along too, The fear lands without needing a single word. It is worth sitting for a moment with how unusual this was. Plenty of horror movies try to scare people by making the camera shake and jump, by cutting fast between pictures, by throwing the screen into chaos so that nobody can tell what is happening. The Shining does close to the opposite. It moves slowly, steadily, and with a terrible patience. The smoothness is the scary part. A shaky picture says that someone is running and afraid. A perfectly smooth picture that keeps coming, no matter what, says that whatever is moving cannot be tired out, cannot be shaken off, and is in no hurry because it knows there is nowhere to go. The hotel becomes, through all this motion, less of a setting and more of a living thing. A normal movie uses its rooms as a backdrop, a place for the people to stand while the story happens to them. Here, the building seems to breathe and watch. The camera glides through it, the way a thought glides through a mind, moving from room to room with a will of its own, peering down halls that lead nowhere, settling on doors that should not open. The people inside grow smaller and smaller against it. The boy on his tricycle is not exploring the hotel. The hotel is letting itself be ridden through and watching him do it and waiting. And so the very first reason this film feels like a nightmare has nothing to do with anything supernatural. It comes from the floor and the wheels and the smooth, endless travel of a camera that a man carried strapped to his body, down halls that were built to go on far longer than any real hotel ever could. Before a single ghost arrives, before anyone says a frightening thing, the movie has already taught the senses that this is a place where space does not work, where movement does not end, and where something patient is always coming along just behind. That lesson sinks in early, and it never lets go for the rest of the running time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The boy finishes his ride. He stops in front of a pair of doors. At the end of a hall, the wheels going quiet one last time. The hush that follows is heavier than the roar ever was. Those wheels roaring and dropping to silence were only the first small hint of how this movie reaches under the skin through sound. The music had not even begun yet. When it finally did, it would not sound like music at all, and it would turn the quiet itself into one of the most frightening things in the entire film. Section 2. Music that was never meant for a movie. Before any person appears, before a single word is spoken, the film opens with a view from high above a mountain lake and a small yellow car winding its way up a narrow road cut into the side of the mountains. The picture is calm and wide and almost beautiful. The water shines. The dark green trees roll on for miles, and laid over all of that open, peaceful scenery is a sound that does not belong with it in any way. It is a low, heavy droning hum, slow and deep, with a melody buried somewhere inside it that seems to crawl rather than play. Floating over the hum is a thin, wailing tone, like faraway voices that never form into words. The car keeps climbing. The mountains keep rolling past, and the sound keeps pressing down on all of it, refusing to brighten, refusing to lift, telling the ear that something is wrong, long before the eyes have any reason to agree. That opening sound is built from one of the oldest and gloomiest pieces of music in the world. Hundreds of years ago, churches sang a slow Latin chant about the day when, in the old belief, the dead would rise from their graves and be judged. It was a funeral song, a song about death, and the end of all things, and its grim little melody became so well known that music writers kept using it for centuries afterward, whenever they wanted to whisper the idea of death into a piece without saying it out loud. For the opening of The Shining, Two musicians named Wendy Carlos and Rachel Elkind took that ancient death melody and rebuilt it on electronic machines, so that it hums and drones and wails in a way no church choir ever could. The very first thing the movie does, before the story even starts, is display the sound of death over a sunny drive in the mountains. What makes this strange goes deeper than that single opening. Carlos and Elkind actually wrote hours of fresh music for the film, enough for a much longer version than the one most people have seen. Almost all of it was thrown out. By the time Kubrick finished cutting the movie down, only a small handful of their pieces survived, including that opening death chant. The rest of the music in the film did not come from anyone writing new movie music at all. It came from real pieces that already existed, written years before by men who never had this film in mind. To see why that choice matters so much, it helps to think about what music normally does in a movie. In almost every film ever made, the music has a job, and the job is to tell people how to feel. Soft, warm music plays during a tender moment, and everyone understands that they are meant to feel touched. Quick, bright music plays during a chase, and everyone leans forward. Sad strings swell when a character cries, and the message is clear. Movie music is usually a guide. It takes the audience by the hand and points at the right feeling. And most of the time, people do not even notice it doing the work. The music in The Shining does almost none of that. The pieces Kubrick chose were written by a small group of music writers, some of them still alive while the movie was being made, who were famous for making some of the oddest and most uncomfortable sounds of their time. One was a man named Bela Bartok. Another was named Gheorghe Ligeti. A third, whose work fills many of the most frightening stretches of the film, was named Krzysztof Penderecki. These men did not write tunes a person could hum. Their music was made of long, scraping sounds, of dozens of instruments sliding around each other, of high, screeching notes that climbed and clashed, of deep groans that seemed to come up out of the floor, of silences that suddenly broke open into noise. It was written to be played by full orchestras in concert halls, for audiences who came on purpose to sit in the dark and listen to it. It was never built to sit underneath a story or to point anyone toward a feeling. By taking that kind of music and placing it under the pictures, Kubrick did something that quietly unbalances the whole film. The sound is not there to comfort, it is there to explain. It does not rise and fall in the neat, expected way that movie music usually rises and falls. A person watching cannot predict where it is going because it has no clear path. It scrapes and groans and swells and dies away on its own schedule, with a will of its own, and the mind never gets to settle into it. There is no melody to lean on, no familiar shape to hold. There is only a feeling of dread that hangs in the air and never resolves. This is part of why the film feels so much like a bad dream. In a nightmare, fear does not always come from a clear cause. A plain object can feel terrifying for no reason a person could ever explain. A quiet room can feel full of threat while nothing in it moves. The dread comes first, attached to nothing, and the mind scrambles to find something to blame it on. The music in The Shining works in exactly that way. Long before a ghost appears, the scraping and groaning has already filled the room with a sense that something terrible is near. And there is no way to point at what it is. The fear arrives with no source, the way fear arrives in sleep. The silences do just as much work as the sounds. Much of the movie sits in a deep, empty quiet. The hotel is huge and almost completely abandoned, and for long stretches there is almost nothing to hear at all. Only footsteps, or wind, or the small noises of an empty building. Then, without warning, the music creeps back in or stabs in all at once, and the quiet shatters. Because the silences run so long and so deep, every return of the sound lands harder. The ear is never allowed to relax. It learns to brace for the next swell that could come at any second, and the waiting itself becomes its own kind of fear. Kubrick had reached for this trick once before, years earlier, in his film about space. In that movie, he used music by the same kind of writer, music made of huge, slow clouds of sound, to turn the empty black of space into something vast and overwhelming and frightening. He had seen, with his own work, that this strange concert music could take a calm and quiet picture and fill it with a feeling far bigger and stranger than the picture alone could ever hold. So when he came to the hotel, he knew what these sounds could do. He knew that the right groaning chord could make an empty hallway feel haunted, and that a sudden screech of strings could turn a closed door into a thing of pure terror. All without showing a single drop of blood. There is something almost cruel in how patient the music can be. During some of the film's slow walks through the hotel, the sound builds and builds, gathering and tightening, climbing toward what feels like it must be the moment something jumps out. And then again and again, nothing jumps out. The music swells to the edge of a scare, and the scare never comes. The relief never quite arrives either. The dread just keeps stacking, with no release. The way a nightmare keeps promising a terrible thing, and never letting it happen, and never letting it go. The choice to borrow real concert music also gives the film a strange kind of age. New movie music, written for a new movie, belongs to that movie and that moment. The pieces Kubrick used were older, made by men working in their own world for their own reasons, and they carry a weight that has nothing to do with the hotel or the family on screen. They sound like they have always existed, like they were here long before the story began, and will go on humming long after it ends. That fits the building perfectly. The hotel in the film is meant to feel ancient and full of things that happened long ago. Things that keep happening over and over. The music feels the same way. It does not feel written for these people. It feels like it was already playing, somewhere deep in the walls, and the family simply walked into the middle of it. All of this connects straight back to the way the film moves. The roaring wheels and the sudden silences of the boy's tricycle were a small lesson in how this movie uses sound to set the nerves on edge. Loud, then nothing, then loud again, in a rhythm that never quite settles. The music does the same thing on a far larger scale, across the whole length of the film. It swells and vanishes. It scrapes and goes still. It climbs toward a peak and drops away without paying off. The ear is pulled along by it, the same way the eye was pulled along, behind the boy, always braced for something, never allowed to rest, never given a tune to hold onto or a clear feeling to settle into. And so the second reason this film feels like a nightmare lives entirely in the air. Even the sound refuses to behave. The music does not guide anyone gently through the story, the way movie music almost always does. It hangs overhead like a low ceiling of dread, made from the strangest and oldest and most unsettling sounds Kubrick could find, beginning with the melody of a centuries-old song about the rising of the dead. Before anyone in the hotel does a single frightening thing, the film has filled every room with a feeling that something is deeply, quietly wrong, and it has done it through the ear, where a person can hear the wrongness, but can never point to its cause. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The hum and the scraping fade. The family arrives at the hotel and steps inside. and for a while the rooms seem ordinary, even grand. But the building they have walked into was put together in a way that should not be possible. The windows look out where no window could ever look. The hallways join up in ways that do not add up. And piece by piece, room by room, the place itself was built to break the simple rules a real building has to follow. Section 3. A building that could not be real. One of the first rooms the film settles into for any real length of time is the office of the hotel manager. A man sits behind a wide desk and talks with the father of the family about the job of looking after the place through the long winter. The talk is calm and friendly. The room is warm and tidy, and behind the manager, taking up most of the wall, is a tall window with bright daylight pouring through it and the shapes of trees somewhere outside. Nothing about that window seems wrong at first glance. A window behind a desk is the most ordinary thing in the world. The trouble only appears later, once the film has shown more of the building around that office. The wall with the window in it has a hallway running along the back of it. A window in that spot could not look outside because there is no outside there for it to look at. On the other side of that glass, by the layout of the rooms around it, there should be nothing but the middle of the hotel and a corridor full of carpet and doors. The bright daylight and the trees have nowhere to come from. The window opens onto a world that cannot exist where the building puts it. This is not a small slip that slipped past a tired crew. The man who helped produce the film, who was also part of Kubrick's own family, explained years afterward that the set had been built to be off on purpose. The rooms were made to not quite fit together. The huge ballroom, he said, was built so large that it could never actually fit inside the building it was supposed to belong to. And the whole aim of all this was for the people watching to never be quite sure where they were. The wrongness was the plan from the start, to feel why a wrong window or a too big room can unsettle a person so deeply. It helps to think about something the mind does all the time without ever being asked. People carry a quiet map in their heads of whatever space they are in. Walk into a friend's house for the first time, spend a few minutes inside, and even from a back bedroom, a person could usually point toward the front door without thinking hard about it. The mind keeps track of where things are, how the rooms join up, which way is out. It builds the map quietly in the background and updates it with every step. And most of the time, nobody notices it is happening at all. Movies usually help that map along. A normal film shows a room, then shows the room next to it, then shows the way out, all in an order that adds up, so the hidden map in the head stays whole and a person watching feels grounded. The Shining keeps tearing that map apart. Each room, looked at on its own, seems perfectly fine. The problem is that the rooms refuse to fit together into a single building that could actually stand. A hallway runs where a room should be. A window opens where a wall should be. A door leads off toward a space that, by everything shown before it, should already be filled with something else. The map in the head keeps trying to draw the hotel, and the hotel keeps breaking the pencil. The mind does not always catch this in the moment. A person watching the film for the first time will rarely stop and say that a window is in the wrong place. What happens instead is quieter and stronger. The hidden sense of where things are starts to slip. The building stops feeling solid underfoot. Without any clear reason, the rooms begin to feel like they are not connected to each other in the normal way, and a low feeling of being lost settles in, the kind of lost where a person cannot even say which direction the front door is in anymore. The hotel becomes a place a person could walk through forever and never map because there is no real map to find. The too-big ballroom does its own part in this. When the father wanders into the grand party room later in the film, the space opens up far wider than it has any right to. The hotel, seen from the outside, is large, but it is still a single building on the side of a mountain. The ballroom inside it feels like it belongs to somewhere else entirely, somewhere with no outside at all. Standing in it, a person loses the sense of being inside a building. The walls are too far away. The ceiling is too high. The room swallows the idea that there is a world beyond it. People who have studied the film closely have tried over the years to draw careful maps of the whole hotel, room by room, hallway by hallway, and they keep running into the same wall. The pieces will not fit. The building cannot be drawn because it was never built to be a building that could be drawn. There is a moment near the end that takes this game of space and turns it strange in a different way. In a large room sits a small model of the outdoor maze, the tall walls of hedges that stand in the snow outside the hotel. The father leans over this little model and looks down into it. The film moves in close on the tiny green paths, and then, with no clear break between one picture and the next, the view becomes the real maze seen from high above, with the mother and the small boy walking through it like two tiny dots far below. For a few seconds, it is impossible to say whether the man is looking at a toy on a table or staring down at the actual world from somewhere high and cold and far away. The small thing and the giant thing blur into each other. Size itself stops being trustworthy. A model and a real place become the same place, and the man bending over the table seems, for a breath, to be looking down on his family the way a much larger and crueler thing might look down on them. Underneath all of this sits one more layer that the film mentions early and then lets quietly poison everything that follows. During that first calm talk in the manager's office, the manager says, almost in passing, that the hotel was built on an old Native American burial ground, and that the builders had to fight off attacks from Native people while they were putting it up. He says it lightly. The talk moves on. The father barely reacts, but the words have been spoken, and they stain the rest of the film. The ground the hotel stands on is ground that holds the dead, and it was taken by force, and the building was raised on top of all of that, as if none of it mattered. The film does not let that idea drop after one line. The walls and floors of the hotel are covered in Native American patterns and designs, woven into the rugs, painted along the borders, hanging in the open spaces. In the big storeroom deep in the building, cans of baking powder are stacked along the shelves, and the labels on those cans show the head of a native chief in a feathered headdress. In one of the film's most important later scenes, the father stands in that very storeroom, speaking through a door, and those cans with the chief's face on them sit right behind his head, plain to see for anyone who looks. Many people who study the film believe that all of these reminders are there on purpose, to keep whispering that the hotel was built on stolen ground, on top of people who were pushed off it and killed for it, and that the building has never stopped carrying the weight of what was done to put it there. Whether or not every single pattern was placed with that exact meaning in mind, the effect on the feeling of the film is real. The hotel is not a blank, safe shell for the family to live in. It is a place with a violent history baked into its walls, a place that sits on death and decorates itself with the faces of the people it was built over. A person watching may never put all of this into clear thoughts. The unease still gathers. The building feels less like a hotel and more like a monument to something terrible, dressed up in warm carpets and bright party rooms, with the truth of it showing through in the patterns on the walls and the faces on the cans in the storeroom. All of this ties back into the way the film moves and the way it sounds. The gliding camera carried a person smoothly through halls that connect in ways no real hotel would allow. So the eye was already traveling through impossible space without being told. The scraping, groaning music filled that impossible space with dread that pointed at nothing in particular. Now the building itself joins in. The window in the wrong place, the room too large to fit, the model that becomes the world, the ground full of the dead beneath the bright, clean floors. Each part of the film is doing the same quiet work in its own way, teaching the senses that the rules a person leans on, the rules about where things are and how a place fits together, do not hold inside the Overlook. A real nightmare almost always plays this exact trick with space. A person dreams of their childhood home and finds a room in it that was never there. A door in the kitchen that opens onto a place that does not belong. The house is theirs and also not theirs. They know it and cannot trust it. They walk through it sure of where they are going and arrive somewhere that makes no sense. And the worst part is that nothing jumps out or shouts. The fear comes only from the slow, sick understanding that the place itself cannot be trusted, that the walls have stopped obeying the rules, that there is no safe map of where they are. The Shining builds a hotel that works precisely that way, on purpose, and then locks a family inside it for a whole winter. By the time the father has been in the building long enough to call it home, the place has quietly stopped being a place at all in the way a real place is. It is a space that bends, that does not add up, that holds the dead in its foundations and shows their faces on the walls, that can shrink to a model on a table or open into a ballroom with no end. The family believes they have moved into a hotel. The film has shown, room by room and window by window, that they have walked into something far stranger. A building shaped like a dream, where the surest feeling a person can have is the feeling of being lost. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The rooms themselves were only the beginning of the trouble. Inside those rooms, the smaller things refuse to hold still as well. A chair that sits in the background of one moment is gone in the next. A rug changes its pattern between one look and the next. A doorway shifts to the wrong side of a hall. The hotel does not only fail to add up as a building, it seems to rearrange itself, quietly, whenever no one happens to be looking straight at it. Section 4. The things that will not stay still. The mother walks into the big main room of the hotel, the wide one with the high ceiling and the huge stone fireplace, where the father has set up his typewriter to work on his book. He has been short with her lately, quick to snap, and the talk between them is careful and uneasy. The camera moves back and forth as they speak, showing her face, then his, then hers again. Behind the father, in the open space of the great room, there is a chair sitting near one of the tall pillars, plain and easy to see. The talk goes on. The camera swings back to him a moment later. The chair is gone. No one walked over and moved it. There was no time for anyone to move it. A breath later, the camera returns once more, and the chair has come back, sitting exactly where it was, as if it had never left at all. That vanishing chair is one of the most talked about little oddities in the whole film, and it is far from the only one. All through the movie, small things refuse to behave. They appear and disappear. They change shape. They slide to the wrong place. None of it is loud. None of it is pointed out. A person could watch the film a dozen times and never once stopped to say that a chair just blinked out of the room. The strangeness works underneath the surface, in the part of the mind that quietly expects the world to hold still and grows uneasy when it does not. Take the floor in the hallway where the small boy plays. He kneels down with his toy cars and trucks on a carpet covered in a bold pattern of shapes, the kind of pattern that runs in clear lines a person could trace with a finger. A ball rolls toward him from somewhere off to the side, with no one in sight to have thrown it. The film shows the boy, then shows the carpet, then comes back, and the pattern on that carpet has flipped. The shapes that pointed one way now point the other. The lines that ran toward the left now run toward the right. The floor itself has quietly turned itself around between one look and the next, while the boy knelt on top of it and noticed nothing. The father's typewriter does the same trick across the length of the film, only slower. In the earlier parts of the movie, the machine he hammers away at is a pale, creamy light color. Later on, with no moment in the story where anyone brings him a new one, the typewriter has become a darker blue-gray. The thing he works at every day, the object the camera returns to again and again, has swapped itself for a different tint color while no one was watching. And the film offers not a word of explanation. It simply happens, and the story rolls on as if nothing changed. These three are the clearest, but they sit among many smaller ones scattered through the building. Signs shift their place. A stand holding a sign turns up in one spot and then another. A nameplate on the manager's desk moves. A mirror hangs on a wall in one part of the film and is missing from that same wall later on. Once a person starts looking for these slips, the hotel begins to feel like a room full of objects that quietly trade places the moment attention turns away. A building where nothing can be fully counted on to be where it was a minute ago. A fair question hangs over all of this, and it deserves an honest answer. Movies are full of small mistakes like these, and most of the time, they mean nothing at all. A film is not shot in order, from start to finish, the way the story runs. The pieces are filmed over many months, out of order, often with long gaps between days that are meant to flow together on screen. Sets get taken apart and put back up. Furniture gets moved by the crew between takes and not always returned to the exact same spot. A short piece might be filmed again weeks later, after part of the set has already been pulled down. So a floor or a wall ends up slightly different from how it looked the first time. Errors of this kind turn up in almost every film ever made, even the careful ones, and usually no one ever notices or cares. So it would be easy, and not unreasonable, to wave all of this away as the normal small sloppiness of a long, messy production. The reason people refuse to wave it away comes down to the man who made the film. Kubrick was known, more than almost any director who ever lived, for caring about details that no one else would ever think to check. He would film a single short stretch of a scene over and over and over, dozens of times, sometimes more than 100 times, chasing some tiny thing he wanted to get exactly right. He pored over every corner of every picture. He controlled the light, the color, the placement of objects, the smallest movements, with a patience that wore his actors down to exhaustion. A man that careful, who would shoot the same few seconds 100 times to perfect them, seems an unlikely man to let a chair blink out of a room in his finished movie, or to leave a carpet flipped backward, or to let a typewriter change color without noticing. And so a great many people who love the film have come to believe that these slips were never slips at all, that a director this exacting must have placed them there on purpose, to scratch quietly at the back of the mind. Here is the plain truth of it, though. No one can prove which answer is right. Kubrick never sat down and explained the chair or the carpet or the typewriter. He did not leave behind a note saying he meant for them to unsettle people. He is gone now, and the question cannot be put to him. The errors are real and visible on screen either way, and that much is beyond doubt. What lies behind them, simple carelessness or careful design, sits in a fog that will most likely never lift. A person watching is left holding both possibilities at once, unable to settle on either, which turns out to be a strangely fitting place to stand for a film like this one. That uncertainty feeds straight into the feeling the movie leaves behind because it copies something that happens inside real nightmares. In a dream, the world will not hold still. A person sets a cup down on a table and turns back, and the cup is gone, or it has become something else, or the table has. A door that was on the left is suddenly on the right. A face changes while no one is looking at it straight on. The strangest part is that the dreaming mind rarely shouts about any of this. It half notices, feels the wrongness, and slides on, unable to be sure whether the thing really changed or whether the memory of it is simply faulty. The Shining recreates that exact slippery, half-noticed wrongness with its chairs and carpets and quietly swapped objects. The world inside the hotel will not stay the same between two looks, and the mind, just like in a dream, cannot quite be sure whether it is the room that shifted or its own memory that failed. There is a deeper layer to this as well, tied to the idea of memory itself. Some of the people who have studied the film closely have wondered whether the slips are meant to suggest that what is being shown cannot fully be trusted, that the whole thing might be playing out the way a remembered or dreamed version of events would play out, with the details quietly wrong in the way. Details always come out wrong when a person tries to rebuild a place from memory. Picture trying to draw, from memory alone, a room a person stayed in years ago. Most of it would come back. A few things would land in the wrong spot. A chair would be missing. A pattern would be remembered backward. The room would be mostly right and quietly, hauntingly off. The hotel in the film carries that same flavor of a place rebuilt from a memory that does not quite hold together. And the small errors, on purpose or not, are part of what gives it that flavor. Whatever the reason behind them, the slips push the hotel one more step away from being an ordinary building and toward being something that feels almost awake. A normal hotel is a dead thing. The walls do not care. The furniture stays where it is left. The Overlook does not behave like a dead thing. Objects in it seem to move on their own when no one looks. Floors turn themselves around. A chair leaves and returns. The whole place gives off the quiet sense of a thing that is paying attention, that rearranges its own insides as a kind of game, that knows the family is there and is toying with the space around them. None of this is ever stated. The building never speaks. The feeling is built entirely out of small things that will not stay still. This carries forward everything the film has been doing from the start. The gliding camera taught the eye that movement here does not work the normal way. The scraping music taught the ear that dread can hang in the air with no clear source. The wrong windows and the two large rooms taught the hidden map in the head that the building does not add up. Now the objects inside that building take up the same lesson on the smallest scale of all. A chair, a rug, a typewriter, the most ordinary things imaginable, cannot be trusted to remain themselves from one moment to the next. Every layer of the film, from the largest sweep of the camera down to a single piece of furniture, keeps repeating the same quiet message that nothing inside the Overlook obeys the steady rules a person leans on without thinking in the waking world. The longer the family stays, the more the place sheds the last of its disguise as a normal hotel. The rooms do not connect. The objects will not hold still. The walls seem to watch. And through it all, the film keeps the wrongness so small and so quiet that a person can feel it long before they can name it, which is exactly how the worst dreams work, the ones where nothing leaps out, and yet everything is somehow deeply, unshakably off. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Objects are not the only things in the hotel that double and repeat in ways that prickle the skin. The people do it too. Two small girls in matching dresses stand together at the end of a hallway, exactly alike, like one child copied and set beside herself. The whole film, once a person starts to notice, is filled with things that come in pairs and faces that mirror each other. And that doubling is about to become one of the most frightening sights the movie has to offer. Section 5. Two girls at the end of the hall. The small boy moves through the hotel, the way he so often does, alone and quiet in the long, empty halls. He comes around a corner, and there at the far end of a hallway stand two girls. They are the same height. They wear the same pale blue dresses, the same white socks, the same neat hair. They stand side by side, close together, holding hands, and they do not move at all. They are not playing. They are not waiting for anything a person could name. They simply stand there, perfectly still. Two girls who look exactly alike, staring back down the hall at the boy. A warning hangs over this moment, planted earlier in the film without much weight at the time. During the father's first calm talk in the manager's office, the manager mentioned, almost as a small piece of history, that the man who looked after the hotel before them had come apart during a long winter alone in the building. That earlier caretaker had killed his wife and his two young daughters with an axe and then had killed himself. At the time, the father waved it off, said it would never happen to him, and the talk moved on to other things. The two girls standing in the hallway are those daughters. The boy is looking at children who were murdered in the very building his family now lives in. The girls speak to him, and the way they speak is part of what makes the skin crawl. They talk together, both at once, in one flat voice, with no rise or fall in it. They ask the boy to come and play with them. And then they say it again, stretching the words out, asking him to come and play with them forever and ever and ever. The voice is gentle and friendly in its words and dead in its sound, the kind of voice that means none of the warmth it is saying. While they speak, the film flashes, just for an instant, to a sight of the two of them lying dead on the floor of that same hallway, soaked in blood, an axe on the ground nearby. Then it snaps back to the girls standing alive and still, hand in hand. It cuts between the two pictures again and again, the living girls and the dead girls, the same children whole and the same children destroyed, until the boy throws his hands over his eyes to make it stop. The two girls were played by real twin sisters, named Lisa and Louise Burns, and the film uses their sameness with great care. They are dressed alike down to the smallest detail. They are posed alike, standing in a mirror of each other, the same way Arbus had once posed the girls she photographed. They are held unnaturally still, the way living children almost never are, so that begin to look less like two people and more like one image set down twice. Everything about how they are shown pushes against the way a person expects to see other people, and that quiet wrongness is what lodges the image so deep that it has stayed one of the most famous and frightening sights in any film for decades. The idea to make these children twins did not come from the book the movie was based on. In the original story, the caretaker's daughters were two ordinary sisters of different ages. One of them 8 and the other 10. A normal pair of siblings a couple of years apart. Kubrick changed them. He turned them into twins, two girls who look exactly alike, and the reason traces back to a single photograph. Years before the film, an American photographer named Diane Arbus had become well known for taking pictures of unusual people, of people on the edges of things, of faces most other photographers passed over. Sometime in the 1960s, she took a photograph of two young twin girls standing side by side against a plain wall. They wore matching dark dresses with white collars, and their hair was held back the same way. And at first glance, they looked like a sweet, simple picture of two sisters. The longer a person studies it, though, the stranger it becomes. The two faces are almost exactly the same, and yet not quite. One mouth turns up just slightly, the other turns down. One girl seems calm, the other a touch uneasy, and the small gap between them, the tiny ways they fail to match, is what makes the sameness start to feel uncomfortable rather than charming. Arbus herself was drawn to exactly that feeling, to the way two people being so alike could turn unsettling, to the strangeness hiding inside the idea of being identical. Kubrick had known Arbus long before he became a famous director. When he was a young man taking pictures for a magazine, she had been a kind of guide to him in the world of photography. So when one of his helpers, a man named Leon Vitali, brought him a copy of that photograph of the twins while they were gathering ideas and images for the film, it struck him hard. He carried the strangeness of that picture into the movie and built it into the two dead girls in the hallway, turning the ordinary sisters of the book into a living, staring copy of the unease Arbus had caught on film years before. The reason twins can unsettle a person so deeply reaches into something very old in the human mind. People expect each face to belong to one person and one person only. A face is how a person is told apart from everyone else in the world. When two faces match exactly, that simple rule breaks, and the mind does not quite know what to do with it. Two becomes one, and one becomes two at the same time. The pleasant version of this is the way people coo over cute twins. The dark version is what The Shining reaches for, the sense that something has gone wrong with the most basic count of the world, that a single person has somehow been doubled, that the rule of one face for one soul has cracked. Underneath that sits an even older fear, the fear of the double. Across many old stories and many places, there runs a deep dread of meeting a copy of oneself, of seeing a second version of a person who should only exist once. To come face to face with your own double in those old tales was almost always a sign of doom, a crack in the natural order, a warning that death was near. The two girls in the hallway are a double in this older sense as well. They are two when they should feel like individuals, and they are also a preview, a copy of a fate, standing in the exact spot where they died and inviting the living boy to join them in it forever. They are not only frightening because they are strange to look at. They are frightening because they are a warning wearing the shape of children, a picture of what could happen to this family, since this family has stepped into the same building, the same winter, the same trap that swallowed the family before them. The film does not stop with the twins when it comes to doubling and mirrors. It threads the same idea through the whole story, sometimes in plain sight and sometimes hidden. The clearest hidden example comes later, when the boy, lost in a kind of trance, takes his mother's lipstick and scrawls a word across a door, saying it aloud in a strange, deep voice that does not sound like his own. The word he writes is a jumble that means nothing on its own. But the door holds a mirror, and when the word is seen in that mirror, the letters flip around and spell out the word murder. The harmless nonsense was hiding a terrible truth inside it the whole time, and the truth only showed itself in reverse, in the glass, when the world was flipped into its mirror version. A safe thing and a deadly thing turned out to be the same thing seen two different ways, which is the very heart of what a mirror does and the very heart of what this film keeps doing. Once a person starts to notice the doubling, it turns up everywhere. There are two elevators standing side by side in the lobby. Mirrors appear again and again, quietly placing a second, reversed world right beside the real one, and the largest double of all is the father himself. The man who looks after the hotel now is walking the same path as the man who looked after it before. Both came to mind the empty building through the long winter. Both were left alone with their family in a place that picks at the cracks in a person until they split open. Both turned on the people they loved with an axe. The film sets the father up, slowly and carefully, as an echo of the caretaker who came before him, a new copy of an old story that the hotel seems to play over and over with whoever it can get its hands on. The two dead girls in the hallway are the children of the last copy of the story. The boy could become a body in the next copy of it. History inside the Overlook does not move forward in a straight line. It loops and doubles and repeats. This looping, doubling quality is one of the deepest reasons the film feels so much like a nightmare. Because dreams are full of exactly this kind of strangeness. In a dream, a single person can somehow be two people at once, or can wear the face of someone they are not. A place can repeat, the same room appearing again and again with small changes. A person can meet themselves, or watch an event play out that they somehow know has already happened before and will happen again. The neat one-way flow of waking life, where each person is one person, and each moment happens once, and then is gone, comes apart in sleep. The Shining takes that coming apart and builds it into the bones of the film, into twin girls and mirror words, and a father retracing a dead man's steps, so that the whole story carries the looping, doubling logic of a dream a person cannot wake from. It also carries forward in a new shape the lesson of everything that came before it. The gliding camera bent the rules of movement. The borrowed music bent the rules of sound. The crooked building bent the rules of space, and the vanishing chairs and flipping carpets bent the rules that say an object should stay itself from one moment to the next. Now the people bend too. A child is doubled into two identical staring girls. A word is doubled into its own deadly reverse. A father is doubled into the ghost of the man before him. The film has worked its way up from the largest sweep of the camera, all the way to the smallest piece of furniture. And now it reaches the people themselves. And it keeps telling the same quiet story at every level. That inside this hotel, the plain rules a person trusts without thinking have all come loose. The twins fade. The boy uncovers his eyes, and the hall is empty again. The way a dream image vanishes the moment a person tries to look at it straight. But the picture of those two girls standing hand in hand, alive and dead at the same time, does not leave. It stays because it touches a fear far older than the film. The fear of the copy, the double, the self that should not exist twice. And it stays because, by this point, the movie has trained the mind to understand that in this place, repetition is never comforting. Repetition is the hotel showing its hand, replaying its old murders, lining up the next family to match the last. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The doubling and repeating had crept past the walls and the furniture and the children by now, and into the father's own mind. The proof of it sat in a tall, neat stack of paper beside his typewriter, where he had been working alone for weeks on the book that was supposed to save him. When his wife finally lifted the top page to read what he had written, she found the same small handful of words typed over and over and over, filling page after page after page, a mind caught in a loop it could no longer climb out of. Section 6. The book that was never written. For weeks the father has shut himself away with his typewriter, hammering at the keys in the big empty room, while his wife and son learn to keep to the edges of the building. The book he is writing is the reason the family came to the hotel at all. It is the great work he kept promising was finally going to pour out of him. Once he had quiet and time and space, he guards it fiercely. He snaps at anyone who comes near. The book is the thread the whole family has been holding on to, the proof that this lonely winter is worth something, that the father is doing important work and will come out the other side a better man. The mother has grown afraid of him by now. He sleeps through the days. He wakes in foul moods. He looks at her and the boy as if they are in his way, as if they are stealing the air he needs. One afternoon, with the father away from his desk, she crosses the big room toward the typewriter, drawn partly by worry and partly by the simple need to know what he has been doing in there all this time. A single page sits in the machine. She leans in and reads it. Then she lifts the thick stack of finished pages beside it and begins to turn through them. What she finds empties the floor out from under the whole story. Every page holds the same sentence, typed over and over, line after line, top to bottom. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. The same words again on the next page, and the next, and the next. She turns the pages faster, her hands starting to shake, and the sentence never changes. It marches down every sheet in long, even rows, hundreds of times, thousands of times, with tiny differences in spacing here and there, sometimes arranged into neat shapes on the page, but always the same handful of words. There is no book. There never was a book. The thing the father has been guarding and promising and pouring his days into is a wall of one sentence, written by a mind that has slipped its track and started running in a circle it cannot climb out of. The sentence itself is an old, common saying, the kind a grandparent might repeat. It means that a person who only ever works, who never rests or plays or laughs, turns dull and lifeless. It is meant as gentle advice, a reminder to take a break. In the hands of this film, it curdles into something far darker. The man typing it has done nothing but work, alone in an empty hotel, cut off from the world, and the saying has come true on him in the worst possible way. The dullness in the old proverb has become something closer to madness, and there is a small, cruel detail buried in the words. The saying uses the name Jack, which in the old version simply means any boy at all. But the man at the typewriter is named Jack. The warning has been speaking his own name back at him the entire time, page after page, as if the sentence had always been about him, as if the hotel had been quietly telling him what it was doing to him and laughing while it did. The way the discovery unfolds is built like a bad dream all on its own. A person searching for something they are half afraid to find, lifting one page and then another, turning faster and faster as the truth dawns, is a shape that nightmares use again and again. There is the slow approach. There is the first page that seems almost normal. There is the dreadful spreading understanding that the wrongness is not just on this page, but on all of them. That it has been there the whole time, hidden behind a closed door, growing while everyone looked away. The horror does not jump out. It seeps up through the paper as the mother realizes, page by page, that the man she has been living with has not been writing a book. He has been losing his mind in plain sight and calling it work. The effort that went into making this pile of pages is its own strange story, and it tells a great deal about the man who made the film. Kubrick did not simply type the sentence onto the few sheets the mother flips through on camera. He had every single page in that towering stack covered in the sentence, by hand, on a real typewriter. A woman named Margaret Warrington, who worked as his secretary, sat and typed the line over and over onto somewhere around 500 sheets of paper, filling each one, so that no matter which page anyone might happen to see, it would carry the same words. He refused to fake it with a few real pages on top of a stack of blank ones. He wanted the madness to be real, all the way down to the bottom of the pile. He went even further than that. The film was sent out to many countries, in many languages, and Kubrick believed that the shock of this moment would be ruined if people in other places had to read the sentence as small words pasted along the bottom of the screen, while the page on screen showed English they could not understand. He wanted everyone, everywhere, to be able to read the madness right there on the paper, at a glance, in their own language. So he had whole new stacks of pages typed up for the other versions of the film, each one filled with a different saying that carried a similar feeling, and he filmed the scene again for each one. In the version made for Italy, the page held an old saying that means the morning has gold in its mouth. In the German version, it carried a line that means a person should never leave for tomorrow what can be done today. In Spain, the pages held a saying about how, no matter how early a person rises, the sun will not come up any sooner. And in France, they carried one that means a thing already held in the hand is worth more than the promise of two more to come. For each of these, the whole stack was typed out by hand, hundreds of pages of the same line, just so that a single moment in a single scene would land with full force on people watching in a different country. There is a quiet, eerie echo in all of this that is hard to shake once a person sees it. The story on screen is about a man who sat alone and typed the same sentence, over and over and over, hundreds of times, until the pages piled up and his mind came apart. And to film that story, a real person sat alone and typed the same sentence over and over and over, hundreds of times, until the pages piled up in 4 languages, all for the sake of getting it exactly right. The madness inside the film and the care taken to make the film rhyme with each other in a way that feels almost too fitting. The same image of a person and a typewriter and an endless wall of repeated words sits at the center of both the story and the making of it. The film about a man consumed by pointless repetition was itself built in this one corner, out of an act of enormous, painstaking repetition. This whole moment grows straight out of the doubling and repeating that came before it. The 2 girls in the hallway were one child shown twice. The hidden word in the mirror was one word that became 2 when flipped. The father was a copy of the caretaker, who came before him. Now the repetition has climbed all the way inside a single human mind. The father is no longer just echoing an old story or standing beside a mirror. His own thoughts have collapsed into a single line repeated without end. The hotel, which keeps looping its old murders and pulling in new families to match the last, has finally gotten its hooks all the way into one person's head, and what it has done in there is replace a whole mind with one sentence on a loop. A loop like that is one of the most frightening things a mind can imagine, because thinking is supposed to move. A healthy mind wanders, jumps, builds one thought on top of another, goes somewhere. A mind stuck saying the same thing forever has stopped going anywhere at all. It has become a record skipping in the same groove, a wheel spinning with no road underneath. People know the small taste of this from real life, from the way a single worry can circle the brain at night and refuse to leave. The same thought coming back and back and back while sleep stays out of reach. The father's pages are that small nighttime loop blown up to a monstrous size and printed out as proof. Hundreds of pages of it. A mind that has nowhere left to go, made visible, stacked neatly on a desk. And then, while the mother stands there with the pages shaking in her hands, the father appears behind her. He has come back without a sound. He asks her, calm and almost pleasant, how she likes it. The pleasant tone is the worst part. The same wrongness that lived in the flat, friendly voice of the twin girls, warmth in the words, and nothing behind them. The man who promised a book and guarded it like treasure now stands over the empty proof of his own unraveling, and instead of shame or fear, there is only that smooth, cold calm. The thing wearing the father's face has finished settling in. The book was never the point. The winter was never going to fix anything. The hotel wanted his mind, and now it has it, and the stack of pages is the receipt. By this point, the film has shown its hand at every level it can reach. The camera bends movement. The music bends sound. The building bends space. The furniture refuses to hold still. The people split into doubles and echoes. And now a human mind has been hollowed out and refilled with a single, repeated line. Each of these is the same nightmare logic working in a different place. The steady, patient breaking of the rules a person leans on without thinking. The discovery of the pages is where all of it lands inside a person, where the slow dread of the whole film finally takes the shape of one clear, terrible fact. That there is no book, there is no plan, there is no sane man at the desk, and there is no easy way out of a building in the dead of winter, with someone whose thoughts have shrunk down to one sentence about all work and no play. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The mother backs away from the desk with the truth now fully in front of her, and the gentle question still hanging in the cold air. The father had been emptied out and filled back up with the hotel's single ugly purpose, and the pages were only the quietest sign of it. The loudest sign had come earlier, and it had come as a flood, when a pair of elevator doors slid open deep in the hotel, and a river of blood came, pouring out across the floor. More blood than any building should ever be able to hold. Section 7. What the hotel was holding deep inside the hotel stand a pair of old elevators, the heavy kind, with thick metal doors and small windows of patterned glass. For most of the film they sit quiet in the background, the sort of thing a person walks past 100 times without a single thought. Then, in a flash that forces its way into the small boy's mind, the doors of one of them slide open, and out of the gap comes blood. Not a trickle, not a stain. A wall of it, a great dark wave that bursts from inside the elevator and pours into the hallway, climbing the walls, swallowing the floor, rolling forward in a slow, heavy tide that carries the furniture along with it, as if the chairs and tables were nothing. The blood keeps coming long after any elevator should be empty, far more than that small space could ever hold, more than the whole building could hold, surging out and out until it fills the picture and rushes straight toward the eyes. To understand why this image arrives the way it does, it helps to know about the gift the boy carries. Since before the family ever reached the hotel, the boy has been seeing things that are not in front of him, flashes of places and people, warnings, pieces of things that have already happened, and things that are still coming. The kindly cook who works at the hotel shares the same gift and gives it a gentle name, telling the boy that some people shine, that they can see and know things others cannot. The gift is presented as something rare and even beautiful. The hotel turns it into a weapon. The building reaches into the boy's shining mind and shoves its ugliest memories into him, makes him see what it has done and what it wants to do again. The flood of blood is the largest and most terrible of these visions. The hotel's deepest secret pressed straight into the mind of a child who never asked to see it. The blood does not come from the book the film was based on. In the original story, the same elevators hold only the sad leftovers of old parties. Scraps of paper and streamers and confetti drifting in the dark, the ghostly remains of celebrations long over. Kubrick threw that quiet image out and replaced it with the flood. He took an elevator full of old party trash and turned it into an elevator that bleeds, a machine that opens its mouth and lets out a river. The change tells a great deal about what he wanted the hotel to be. A building full of old confetti is haunted in a wistful, gentle way. A building that pours blood from its elevators is something else. A place so full of death that the death has started to leak out through the seams. Getting that flood onto the screen turned into one of the hardest jobs of the entire film, and the story of how it was done has been told by the man who helped Kubrick pull it off, his close helper, Leon Vitali. The first problem was the blood itself. Real blood would have been impossible to use in those amounts, so the team had to mix up fake blood, and the look of it had to be exactly right. Too bright, and it would seem like paint. Too thin, and it would seem like colored water. They spent weeks working on nothing but the color and the thickness, mixing and testing and mixing again, because they were going to need an enormous amount of it, and every drop had to read as real on screen. By some accounts, the whole effort to get the flood right stretched on for close to a year, with Kubrick turning down attempt after attempt, saying again and again that what he was seeing did not look like blood. The amounts involved were staggering. The flood called for hundreds of gallons of the fake blood, enough to truly fill a hallway and roll like a wave. That much liquid packed behind a set of elevator doors created a real danger, because the pressure of it, pushing to get out, was strong enough that things could burst if the team was not careful. On the day they finally filmed it, the crew filled the elevator space right to the top and set up 4 separate cameras to catch the flood, each one capturing the motion a little differently, so that no matter what happened, they would have the moment recorded from several angles at once. The people running those cameras had to climb inside large wooden chests and shut themselves in, because anyone standing in the open would have been knocked down and soaked the instant the doors gave way. Even with all the planning, the blood began leaking out around the doors before they were even meant to open, the pressure too great to hold back. And when the flood finally came, it was so powerful that it swept the furniture along in front of it, exactly as it does in the finished film. There is one more piece to the story that shows how strange the whole thing became. When the time came to make a short preview of the film to show in theaters, Kubrick wanted to use the shot of the blood pouring from the elevator because he knew how powerful it was. The studio worried that it was too gory for a preview, so he told them, with a straight face, that the red flood was not meant to be blood at all, that it was only rusty water spilling out of an old pipe, and on that strength he got them to allow it. The most drenching, blood-soaked image in the film slipped into theaters dressed up as plumbing trouble. The reason the image works so deeply has a lot to do with the sheer impossible amount of it. A person can picture a wound, a stain, a small spill. The mind has a sense of how much blood there is supposed to be in the world. The flood from the elevator throws that sense out completely. The blood does not stop when it should. It keeps coming far past any sane limit, the way water keeps rising in the worst kind of dream. The kind where a person tries to bail out a sinking room and the water only climbs faster. The volume itself is the horror. It is more death than the building should be able to contain. And the fact that it keeps pouring says that whatever is behind those doors is bottomless, that the hotel's supply of blood has no end. It matters, too, that the flood comes out of an elevator, a plain, everyday machine. A coffin pouring blood would be frightening in an ordinary, expected way. An elevator is something a person rides without a second thought, a boring metal box that goes up and down. Turning that boring box into the source of a red tide is the same trick the whole film keeps playing, taking the most normal thing in a building and making it monstrous. The hallway, the carpet, the chair, the typewriter, the elevator. One by one, the film reaches for the ordinary furniture of daily life and fills it with dread, and the bleeding elevator is the loudest example of all. The flood also sits in that strange place between real and unreal, because it comes as one of the boy's visions. It may not be happening in the hallway at that moment in any solid way. It is a thing the hotel is making him see, a memory or a warning pushed into his shining mind. So a person watching is never quite sure how to hold it. The blood looks utterly real, heavy and thick and physical, and yet it might be pure vision, a thing that exists only inside a child's head. That uncertainty is the exact texture of a nightmare, where the most vivid and drenching horror can pour over a person and then vanish, leaving them unsure whether any of it ever truly happened. The blood is overwhelming and weightless, at the same time, as real as anything in the film, and possibly not real at all. What the flood seems to be saying underneath connects back to the dark history the hotel carries. The building was raised on ground that held the dead, on land taken by force, with violence woven into its walls, from the patterns on the rugs to the faces on the cans in the storeroom. The previous caretaker murdered his family inside it. The film keeps suggesting that this is not the first such murder and will not be the last, that the hotel loops its bloodshed over and over with whoever it can trap. The flood of blood is all of that violence given a single shape. It is the killing the building was built on, and the killing it keeps causing, gathered together and bursting out through the only opening it can find. The hotel has been holding all of this blood the whole time, behind its calm doors and its warm carpets, and the vision is the building unable to hold it any longer. This pours straight out of everything the film has been doing from the start. The crooked rooms and the burial ground beneath them taught that the building stands on something rotten. The looping caretakers and the doubled children taught that the hotel repeats its murders. The wall of typed pages taught that the place hollows out a mind and fills it with its own purpose. The flood gathers all those threads into one overwhelming picture. It shows with no words at all that the dread hanging over every quiet hallway has a source, and the source is an ocean of death the building has been carrying inside itself, waiting the entire time the family has been wandering its halls, believing they were merely cold and lonely and a little afraid. The flood recedes the way visions do, leaving the hallway dry and ordinary again. The elevators sitting quiet as if nothing ever happened. But the image does not leave the mind that easily. It stays because it is too large to forget, A wave of blood that broke every sense of how much horror a single building could hold. And it stays because the long, patient, almost unhinged effort it took to create it, the months of mixing blood, the hundreds of gallons, the cameras hidden in chests, points at a truth that runs all through the making of this film. The people who built these nightmares chased them with a devotion that bordered on the very obsession the film is about. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That devotion reached its cruelest edge somewhere else entirely, away from the blood and the visions, in the simple sight of a frightened woman backing up a staircase. The terror on her face in the film's most desperate moments was not always something she was only pretending to feel. A great deal of it was real fear, real exhaustion, real tears, pulled out of her over and over until the line between acting and truly suffering had all but disappeared. Section 8. The fear that was real. A woman backs slowly up a staircase, swinging a baseball bat in front of her with both hands. Her face is wet with tears. Her breath comes in ragged gulps. Her eyes are red and swollen and wide with terror. Below her, her husband climbs the stairs one step at a time, talking to her in a low, mocking, sing-song voice, telling her he only wants to look at the book she has been reading, telling her not to be afraid even as he closes the distance. She swings the bat to keep him back. She begs him to stay away. Every part of her, the shaking hands, the cracking voice, the panic in her face, reads as raw and real, in a way that most movie fear never quite manages. The reason it reads that way is simple and uncomfortable. A great deal of that fear was not pretend. The exhaustion in her face was real exhaustion. The tears were real tears. The woman, an actress named Shelley Duvall, was put through one of the hardest filming experiences any performer has ever talked about, and the terror on screen is partly the terror and worry of a person who had been pushed close to her breaking point and filmed there over and over until the acting and the actual suffering had blurred into the same thing. Kubrick was known, more than almost any director alive or dead, for filming a scene again and again and again, where most directors might shoot a moment a handful of times and move on. He would shoot it dozens of times, sometimes far more, chasing something only he could see, refusing to keep a single try until it matched the picture in his head. This method could wear actors down to nothing, and on this film it did. One scene in the movie holds an official world record for the most takes of a single scene with spoken words, 148 separate tries, and that record-breaking scene was a quiet one, between the friendly cook and the small boy. The scene on the staircase, the one with the bat, was filmed by the count most often repeated, around 127 times. The same desperate, sobbing, terrified moment, performed by the same woman more than 100 times in a row. Duvall spoke about what that felt like years later, and her account is hard to read. She said the director would not keep a take until at least the 35th try, and that doing a scene that many times, running and crying and carrying a small child, wore her down in a way that is difficult to describe. She said that after a while, the body simply rebuilds, that it stops wanting to cry on command day after day, and that sometimes the mere thought of having to summon those tears again was enough to bring them on by itself. The whole film took over a year to make, a long, cold, draining stretch, and for much of it, she was the one asked to be afraid and weeping, while the cameras rolled and rolled. The red, puffy eyes in the film were not painted on. The trembling was not a trick. It was what a real person looks like after being asked to fall apart, again for the 100th time. It has been reported that the strain grew so heavy that her hair began to fall out, and that she once showed the director a handful of it, as if to prove how far the work was taking her. The director's own young daughter, Vivian Kubrick, was on the set filming a behind-the-scenes record of how the movie was made, and some of what she captured shows just how tense things could become. There are moments in that record where the director is sharp and cold, with Duvall, where the pressure on her is plain to see. The making of the film left its own trail of evidence, a record of real distress sitting right beside the pretend distress of the story. The picture that comes through is a complicated one, and it deserves to be told honestly rather than flattened into a simple tale of a cruel man and a suffering woman. Duvall did not describe the whole thing as nothing but torment. At times, she also said the director was warm with her, that he spent a great deal of time with her, that there was real care mixed in with the hardness. What seems clear is that he pushed her on purpose, that he believed the exhaustion and the fear would show up on screen as something no amount of ordinary acting could fake, and that he was willing to wear her down to get it. The cost to her was real, and so was the result. The fear in the film is so convincing because, underneath the story, it was partly genuine fear, drawn out of a real person at real expense. The two lead actors went through the film in very different ways. The husband was played by Jack Nicholson, who got along well with the director and seemed to thrive in the chaos of the production. The script changed so often that Nicholson eventually gave up reading the new versions at all and simply learned his lines minutes before each scene. The most famous thing he says in the entire movie, the line he shouts as he hacks through a door with an axe, was not in any script. He made it up on the spot, borrowing it from the way a television show of the time announced its host. The door he chops through had to be rebuilt partway through, because Nicholson, who had once trained to fight fires, tore the first, weaker door apart far too quickly and too easily, so the crew built a sturdier one for him to battle. That single sequence at the door took 3 days to film. The man got to improvise and play and break things. The woman got to cry on command, over 100 times until her body gave out. At the time the film came out, the world treated Duvall's performance unfairly. She was mocked for it, even handed a nomination for one of the worst acting prizes of the year, as if the raw, painful quality of her fear were a sign of bad work rather than the whole point of it. In the years since, opinion has turned completely around. Her performance is now widely seen as one of the great performances in all of horror, precisely because the terror feels so genuine, so stripped of the usual safe distance of acting. The very thing that made people uncomfortable, the sense that they were watching something too real, is now understood as exactly what makes it unforgettable. The reason all of this matters so much to the feeling of the film reaches into the basic deal a person makes when they sit down to watch a scary movie. The deal is that the horror is pretend. The people on screen are only acting. A viewer can feel the scare and enjoy the scare because underneath it all, they know that everyone is fine, that the screaming woman will go home at the end of the day, that the fear is a performance and nothing more. That quiet knowledge is what keeps a horror movie safe to watch. The Shining quietly breaks that deal. The fear on the woman's face is, in part, real fear. The tears are real tears, pulled from a real person who was genuinely worn down. When a person watches her back up that staircase, sobbing and swinging the bat, they are watching something closer to actual suffering than to pretending. Even a person who knows nothing about how the film was made can feel this. Real fear has a texture that performed fear usually lacks, a kind of raggedness and unpredictability, and that texture comes through whether or not a viewer can name it. There is a sense watching her that the safe pretend has slipped, that the screen has stopped being a window onto a made-up story and become a window onto a person genuinely coming apart. That collapse of the safe distance is one of the most unsettling things any film can do, and it lines up perfectly with the way a nightmare works. In a nightmare, there is no safe distance, no comforting knowledge that none of it is real. The fear is simply happening to the dreamer, without any wall between them and it. The Shining smuggles a piece of that wall, less terror into a film that is supposed to be pretend, and the result is a fear that reaches the audience more directly than it has any right to. There is a darker rhyme in all of this too, between the story the film tells and the way the film was made. The story is about a family trapped in a cold, isolated place that slowly grinds them down, that wears at their minds and their bodies until something breaks. The making of the film was, in its own way, long and cold and isolating and grinding, and the actress at its center was worn down until she nearly broke, on purpose, so that the breaking would show. The conditions behind the camera came to echo the conditions in front of it. The film about people being worn to pieces was partly built by wearing a person to pieces, and the central method, that endless repeating of the same desperate moment, doing the same sobbing scene 127 times, turns the film's own deepest theme back onto the people making it. The whole movie is soaked in repetition, in loops, in the same thing happening over and over until it hollows a person out. The two staring girls who were one child doubled, the father echoing the dead caretaker, the hundreds of pages of a single repeated sentence. The hotel replaying its murders, and then off-screen, the same terrified performance, repeated past the point of endurance, until it stopped being a performance at all. The loop that destroys the family in the story is the same shape as the loop that the film used to capture their destruction. Knowing this changes the film. Once a person learns that the fear was partly real, the staircase scene can never again be watched as simple make-believe. A second layer of unease settles underneath the first, a real-world dread sitting beneath the fictional one, the knowledge that the suffering on screen had a true cost. The hotel was a set. The blood was not real. The ghosts were actors in old costumes. But the fear on that woman's face was, in part, exactly what it looked like. In a film built entirely around the breaking of the rules a person trusts, this is perhaps the deepest break of all. The rule that says a movie is only a movie, that the horror ends when the camera stops. For her, on those days, it did not simply end when the camera stopped. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. When the long, grinding work was finally over, and the film had ground its way to its last few minutes, it left behind one final image, calm and quiet after all that fury. The camera drifts toward an old photograph hanging on a wall, a picture taken at a party many decades before any of the family was ever born. And there, smiling out from the center of that ancient crowd, stands the father, exactly as he looks now, as though he had been inside that hotel all along, as though there had never been any way out of it and never would be. Section 9. The man who was always there. The fury is finally over. The father has chased his wife and son out into the snow, into the tall hedge maze that stands beside the hotel, swinging his axe and roaring through the dark. Earlier in the film, the mother and the boy had walked that same maze together in the daylight, tracing its twisting green paths all the way to the center and back, learning its turns without knowing they would ever need them. The boy remembers. Now, with his father crashing through the maze behind him, he uses that memory. He turns back along his own path and steps carefully into his own footprints, then leaps off to the side and hides, so that his tracks in the snow seem to stop dead with nowhere to go. The father reaches that spot, finds the trail broken, and stumbles off the wrong way, deeper into the cold. Left alone among the frozen hedges, he wanders in circles, his rage burning down into confusion, and then into nothing at all. By morning, he is frozen solid, slumped in the snow with frost in his eyebrows and his mouth hanging open, dead and still. The hotel has gone quiet. The long winter of terror seems at last to be finished. A cook had tried to save them. Far away, in the warmth of his own home, the kindly man who shared the boy's gift had felt that something was terribly wrong at the hotel, and he had traveled for days through a brutal winter storm to reach them, crossing half the country, and then driving the last frozen miles up the mountain in a snow machine. He made it inside. He called out into the empty halls, and the father, waiting in the shadows with his axe, struck him down the moment he stepped into the open. The man who came to help became one more body the hotel claimed. And the snow machine he had arrived in became the very thing that carried the mother and the boy away to safety. Even the rescue fed the building first. There is a cruel fittingness in where the father meets his end. The maze had appeared once before, as a small model on a table inside the hotel, a neat little plaything he had loomed over and studied from above, as though he were something far larger than a man peering down at tiny figures lost inside it. Now the toy has become his tomb. He dies within the very shape he once gazed down upon, trapped in its frozen corridors, turned from the watcher into the watched, from the giant over the model into a small lost fogger caught in the real thing. The maze, a place built to make people lose their way, keeps its promise on him at the last. Then the film does something no one watching it, for the first time, could ever expect. The camera, calm and slow, drifts down a hallway inside the hotel, moving toward a wall covered in old framed photographs. A gentle, old-fashioned dance tune begins to play, the kind of soft, sweet music that might have drifted through a grand party long ago. The wall is lined with pictures of the hotel's past, image after image of guests and gatherings from years gone by, the building's whole history hung up in neat rows. The camera moves closer and closer to one photograph in particular, a black and white picture of a huge crowd of people dressed in the formal clothes of an earlier time gathered together for a celebration. The camera keeps pushing in, slowly, steadily, until that single photo fills the whole screen. And there, standing right in the middle of the crowd, beaming out with a wide and easy smile, is the father. Unmistakably, it is the same man, the same face, the same features, looking exactly as he looked all through the film. He stands at the front of the old party as though he belonged there, as though he had always belonged there, happy and at home among all those long-dead strangers. Beneath the photograph, in small printed words, the picture is dated. It tells anyone who reads it that this was a party held at the hotel, a grand summer ball thrown on a national holiday. In the year 1921, decades before the father was ever born, the mind reels at it. A man who froze to death in the snow only minutes ago is somehow smiling out of a photograph taken long before his own birth. He cannot have been at that party. No living person could have stood in a crowd that gathered generations before they existed. And yet there he is, unmistakable, placed at the very center of it, as if the hotel had reached back through time and quietly tucked him into its own past. That year, stamped under the photograph, carries its own quiet weight. 1921 is not a date close to the family. It is a date deep in the past, from a world of stiff collars and formal gowns and music that crackles like an old record, a time when none of the people in the film had yet been born. Freezing the father into that distant year strips him out of his own life entirely. He no longer belongs to the present, to his wife and son, to the man who drove a yellow car up a mountain road at the start of the film. He belongs to the hotel's long memory now, pinned to a single old evening, smiling forever in clothes from before his time, a face that has slipped loose from its own place in the world and drifted backward into a past that should never have held it. There is one more layer of strangeness that the people in the original audience could not have known about. The image was put together by taking a real photograph from long ago and slipping the actor's face into the middle of it. The crowd around the father, all those formal figures in their old clothes, were real people, once alive, gathered for a real evening that truly happened. For decades, almost no one knew where that original old photograph had come from. The real picture, the one with its true faces, faded into the background after the film borrowed it, lost among countless other forgotten images. Then, 45 years after the film first reached theaters, the mystery was finally solved. A retired teacher and researcher named Alasdair Spark managed to track down the original photograph, and the story of where it came from was at last brought to light. So the father does not only stand among imaginary ghosts, he stands among the faces of real people who lived and died long ago. One of their number quietly swapped out so that he could be folded into a moment that was never his to begin with. The man who made the film offered his own explanation for what the photograph means, speaking with a French writer not long after the movie came out. Kubrick said that the photograph at the end suggests that the father is a kind of return, a person from the hotel's distant past, reborn into the present. By this reading, the father was never truly a fresh arrival at all. He was someone who had been part of the hotel long ago, brought back, drawn once more into the building to play out the same dark part he had played before. The smiling man at the center of the old party is the father in an earlier life, and the father in the film is that same soul returned, walking back into the trap that had always been waiting for him, never once realizing he had been there before. That explanation fits a chilling thing spoken earlier in the film. While the father is losing the last of his mind, he meets the ghost of the caretaker who came before him, the man who murdered his own family in the hotel years ago. That ghost tells the father, calmly and surely, that the father has always been the caretaker, that he has been there all along. At the time, the words sound like the ramblings of a haunted dream, easy to brush aside in the moment. The photograph at the very end makes them land with full weight. The hotel does not simply hire a new caretaker each winter and send him on his way. It calls back the same soul over and over, the same man wearing different clothes in different years, to walk the same halls and break in the same way, and add himself to the crowd in the old photographs when it is done with him. The man before him did it, he did it, and the building waits, patient and quiet, for the next time it can do it again. The idea behind the photograph touches one of the oldest fears people carry, the fear of being doomed to repeat. Across many old stories runs the dread of a fate that comes around again and again, of a person trapped in a circle they did not choose and cannot break, condemned to live the same ruin over and over without end. The father is caught in exactly such a circle. He is the new shape of an old soul, walking the path that soul has walked before, blind to the fact that the ending was decided long ago. The doubling that ran all through the film, the twin girls, the mirror word, the father echoing the caretaker before him, was leading toward this final and largest double of all. The father standing beside his own earlier self in a crowd, the same person living the same doom twice. Not everyone reads the photograph the same way, and the film leaves room for more than one answer. Some believe the picture shows the hotel swallowing the father's soul, pulling him fully inside itself the moment he died in the snow, adding him to its hidden collection of trapped spirits. Others believe the photograph is a kind of record of everyone the hotel has ever taken across the years, with the father now joining their silent number. Whatever the exact meaning, all of these readings point in the same direction, toward a single terrible idea. The father is not gone. His death in the snow did not free him from the hotel. It handed him over to the place forever, and the place was glad to take him. That idea sits at the heart of why the ending lands like the deepest part of a nightmare. Through the whole film, a small hope flickers underneath the dread, the hope that the family might get out, that the winter might end, that the horror might one day be over and behind them. The mother and the boy do escape into the snow, and for a moment it seems that the hope has held, that the worst is past, that the story is closing the way a frightening story is supposed to close. The photograph snatches all of that back. It says that the horror does not end. It says that the father is caught in the hotel for all time. And worse than that, it says he was always caught. That there was never any single point at which he could have turned around and walked away, because he had been part of the building since long before the story ever began. The trap had no opening. It only looked for a while like a story with a way out. Most frightening stories grant a kind of release at the end. The monster is killed, the danger passes, the survivors walk out into the light, and the people watching can let out the breath they have been holding and feel the safety return. That release is part of the unspoken bargain of being scared on purpose. A person agrees to feel afraid because they trust that the fear will end and they will be set free of it. The Shining refuses to keep that bargain. It offers the shape of release, the escape into the snow, and then it pulls the floor away with the photograph and leaves a person standing in the dread with nowhere to set it down. There is no breath to let out. The fear is simply handed over, unfinished, to be carried out of the theater and home and into sleep. A loop with no exit is one of the worst shapes a nightmare can take. There are dreams a person cannot wake from, dreams that circle back on themselves, where every escape leads to the same room and every door opens onto the same hallway. The dreamer runs and runs, and ends up exactly where they started, and slowly comes to understand that there is no edge to the dream, no outside to reach, no morning waiting on the other side of it. The photograph turns the whole film into that kind of dream. The father ran, fought, raged, died, and ended up smiling in a picture from decades before, right back at the center of the hotel, exactly where he had always been. The story did not move forward and stop the way stories are meant to. It curved around and joined back up with its own beginning, sealing itself into a ring. The calm of the ending makes it worse rather than gentler. There is no scream over the photograph, no burst of frightening sound, no final shock leaping out of the dark. The camera glides in softly. The old dance tune plays, sweet and warm, the music of a party from a happier-looking time. The father in the picture is smiling, peaceful, content. After all the blood and the axe and the frozen body in the snow, The film ends on something that looks almost pleasant, and that pleasantness is the most disturbing note of all. The father is happy in the photograph because the hotel has won completely. He is not fighting anymore. He is not afraid. He belongs there now, fully and forever. One more smiling face in the crowd. And his peace is the awful peace of a man who has been swallowed whole and has stopped struggling against it. Something about how the first audiences met this ending matters here. When the film came out, people watched it once, in a dark theater, with no way to pause the picture or rewind it or freeze the photograph and study the face. The image appeared, the camera pushed in, the words and the date flashed by, and then the film was over. And the lights came up before anyone could be sure of what they had just seen. Many people left puzzled and unsettled, carrying a confused, lingering dread rather than a clear answer. The reviews at the time were mixed, and some viewers were frustrated by an ending that explained nothing and tied nothing up. That confusion was part of its power. The photograph was not built to be solved on the spot. It was built to send a person home with a cold feeling they could not quite name, the way a nightmare lingers in the chest long after waking, even once the details have slipped away. Once a person has seen the ending, the whole film changes on a second watch. The father's wide grin in his very first scene, the friendly job talk in the manager's office, the easy charm he shows before anything has gone wrong. All of it reads differently when a person already knows where he ends up. The smile in the old photograph and the smile in that first interview begin to look like the same smile. The look of a man who, somewhere beneath his own knowing, was already the hotel's, already caught, already walking the circle. The dread that the ending plants reaches all the way back to the opening minutes and stains them, so that even the calm beginning of the film carries. On a second viewing, the quiet weight of a doom that was sealed before the story ever started. Everything the film has been quietly building arrives at this single frozen image, the gliding camera that moved like something following close behind. The borrowed music that filled the air with dread that pointed at nothing. The crooked rooms that would not add up. The objects that would not hold still from one look to the next. The doubled children and the word hiding inside the mirror. The mind worn down to one repeated sentence. The flood of blood the building could not possibly hold. The fear on a woman's face that was partly real. All of it pointed here, to a man caught in a loop with no way out, to a hotel that takes the same soul again and again and keeps it pinned among its photographs. The repetition that ran through every layer of the film was always heading toward this. The father joining the old party is the last and largest loop, the one that closes the circle and locks it shut for good. The photograph also answers, in its cold and quiet way, the question the whole film has been circling from the start. The hotel was never just a haunted house with a few ghosts rattling around inside. It was a thing that feeds on people, that calls them back across the years, that runs the same murder over and over with whoever it can pull through its doors, and that keeps a piece of each of them when the winter is done. The father was its newest meal and its oldest guest at the very same time. The latest face of a man it had been holding on to since 1921. The dread that hung over every silent hallway from the very first scene had a destination all along. And the destination was this: a smile in a photograph, a soul that can never leave, a winter that will come around again. Nothing about the building has changed. The halls are still there, the rooms still wait, the photographs still hang in their neat rows on the wall, and somewhere a new family will one day drive up the same mountain road, never guessing what is waiting for them inside. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A strange, dreamlike, unending photograph, with its smiling trapped man and its impossible date, is exactly the kind of ending one particular person could never stand. The man who wrote the original story, the book the whole film was built from, looked at what Kubrick had made of his work and felt that something precious had been thrown away. He had written a sad and warm story about a family and a father fighting to hold on to himself, and he believed the film had turned it into something cold and hollow. And he has spent more than 40 years saying exactly that out loud to anyone who will listen. Section 10. A beautiful car with no engine. The man who wrote the book the film came from is named Stephen King, and he is one of the most famous storytellers in the world. He wrote the novel The Shining in 1977, 3 years before the film, and the story poured out of a very personal place. King had struggled with drinking himself, had felt the fear of being a father who might one day hurt the people he loved, and he built all of that into the book. So, when Kubrick took his story and turned it into the film, and when that film grew into one of the most praised horror movies ever made, King did something almost no other author has ever done about a beloved version of their own work. He said, plainly and often, that he could not stand it. He has gone on saying so for more than 40 years. Knowing how close the book sat to King's own life helps make sense of his anger. During the years he was writing it, King was drinking heavily, deep in a long struggle with alcohol that he would not fully climb out of for some time. He has spoken openly since about how frightened he was, in those years, of what a man weighed down by drink and a quick temper might do to the family he loved. The father in his book was, in part, a darker shadow of himself, a warning he wrote out of his own fear. That is why the warmth mattered to him so much. The father was never meant to be a monster from the start. He was meant to be a flawed and loving man, close enough to King himself that the slow ruin of him would land like a real blow. To see that man played as cracked and sinister from his first moment on screen was, for King, to watch his own private fear flattened into a cheap villain. King's deepest complaint can be gathered up into a single comparison he has made about the film. He said it was like a big, beautiful car with no engine inside it. The film, in his eyes, looked gorgeous, every picture polished and perfect, and yet underneath the shine, there was nothing running, no warm, beating heart to drive it forward. To King, the film had the body of something great and none of the soul. That comparison points straight at what Kubrick did to the story, and at why the film feels the way it feels. The change King has fought hardest about is what happened to the father. In King's book, the father begins as a basically good man. He is a struggling writer trying hard to stay sober, a father who loves his wife and son and fears his own temper. The horror of the book lies in watching that decent man be slowly pulled apart by the hotel, fighting it the whole way, losing himself an inch at a time. The reader is meant to love him first, and then grieve as he slips away. In the film, the father seems wrong from his very first scene. In the early job talk in the manager's office, before anything strange has happened, before the family has moved in, the man already wears a sharp, sly, half-mad look. King has said this ruins the whole point, because there is no good man left to lose. The father in the film starts somewhere near the edge, and San simply walks the rest of the way over it. There is no slow fall, no decent person to mourn, only a man who was plainly going to break from the moment he appeared. That missing slow descent sits at the very heart of King's anger. and at the very heart of the film's dread, both at the same time. A slow descent is a comforting shape, even inside a horror story. It tells a person that there was a before, a time when things were fine, a normal man and a normal family, and that the horror crept in from outside and took them by degrees. A shape like that keeps the horror at a safe distance, because a thing with a beginning can be imagined having an end. The film denies that comfort completely. By making the father seem already broken in his very first scene, it takes away the safe before. There was never a calm starting point to fall from. The wrongness was there from the first frame, the way the wrongness in a nightmare is there the very instant the dream begins, with no gentle stretch of ordinary life to lose along the way. King wanted that before, because the before is what makes a fall hurt. The film refused the before, because the absence of it is what makes a dream feel so airless and so trapping. King's second complaint follows close behind the first. He felt the film was cold, that it kept the family at arm's length, and gave the audience no real reason to love them or to fear for them. The book spends much of its time making the reader care about these three people, showing their tenderness and their love for one another underneath all the strain. The film strips most of that away. The family in the film feels distant and chilly, a little strange even with each other, hard to get close to. King wanted warmth, the kind of warmth that makes a tragedy truly hurt. Kubrick gave him ice instead. The harshest thing King has ever said about the film concerns the mother, Wendy. He called the version of her in the film one of the most insulting portraits of a woman ever put on screen. A character who, by his account, is mostly there to scream and be foolish and little else. The mother in his book was a strong and capable woman with her own hard past, her own quiet courage, even a small touch of the boy's gift herself. She was a full person who pushed back and fought. The mother in the film, in King's eyes, was hollowed out into a frightened, shrieking shadow of the woman he had written, and he has never forgiven the film for doing it. There were other changes that stung him just as much. King felt the film buried the deeper history of the hotel and the real weight of the father's drinking, both of which carried enormous importance in the book, and the two endings could hardly be more different. In King's novel, the father, in his last moments, claws back a sliver of himself, a flash of the loving man he used to be, just long enough to warn his son to run and to let his family escape. Then the hotel, neglected and overheating, blows itself apart and is destroyed at last. It is a sad ending, and a warm one, with a father who saves his child and a building that finally falls. The film throws every piece of that away. The father in the film never comes back to himself. He simply freezes in the snow, and the hotel stands untouched. And the final image is that cold photograph that quietly says nothing was ever really beaten at all. Even the small details were changed in ways that show how differently the two men saw the story. In the book, the forbidden room, the one filled with horror, is numbered 217. The real hotel used for the outside shots of the film happened to have a room 217, and the people who ran it worried that guests would be too frightened to ever stay in it again, so they asked for the number to be changed. Kubrick changed it to 237, a room number that did not exist there at all. In the book, the grounds of the hotel held hedges trimmed into the shapes of animals, animals that would come horribly to life and shift their positions when no one was watching them. The film swapped those living hedge animals out for the great hedge maze, partly because making the animals move in a convincing way would have been far too hard and costly to pull off. The maze, which began life as a simple practical swap, became one of the most important images in the entire film. Kubrick did not arrive at this coldness by accident or by carelessness. He wrote the film with the help of a novelist named Diane Johnson, and together they reshaped the story with great care, keeping some pieces, cutting others, and deliberately leaving open questions the book had answered. He wanted the hotel to feel uncertain, the audience unsure what was real, and what was happening only inside a character's head. The whole thing closed to any easy explanation. The choices that drove King to anger were chosen on purpose by a director who knew exactly the warm and clear story he was turning away from. He had the warm version right in front of him, in the pages of the book, and he stepped around it on purpose, reaching instead for something stranger and colder, and far less willing to comfort anyone at all. King disliked the film so deeply that years later, he did something about it. In 1997, he wrote and helped make his own version of The Shining, a long television story that followed his book far more closely, with a different actor as the father and a stronger, fuller mother, much closer to the one he had first written. That version held tight to his story. It kept the warmth, kept the slow fall, kept the redemption at the end. It was met with mixed feelings, and it is remembered today by far fewer people than the film. The version King hated is the one the whole world cannot forget. There is a quiet proof of all this hidden in the fate of King's own faithful version. His television story did everything he had wished the film would do, keeping the good man and the slow fall, the strong mother, the saved child, the warm and bittersweet end, and letting the audience love the family and then grieve them. By every measure King cared about, it told the story right, and almost no one remembers it now. The faithful, warm, well-meaning version slipped quietly out of the world's memory, while the cold and unfaithful one became one of the most famous films ever made. That difference says something hard and true. The warmth King wanted made for a gentler, kinder story and a forgettable one. The coldness he hated made for a colder, crueler film and an unforgettable one. A tragedy told well makes a person weep, and then in time lets them move on, because grief has an end to it. A nightmare does not let go so easily. It lodges somewhere deeper and simply stays. None of this was an instant success. When the film first opened, the reviews were mixed and often unkind, and many of the people who saw it that first summer came away puzzled and let down. It arrived the same season as a beloved space adventure that filled theaters with joy, and beside that warmth, Kubrick's cold, slow, strange horror film struck many viewers as a misfire. For a while, it seemed that King's harsh view might simply be the common one. Then something rare happened. The film did not fade. It grew. Slowly, it climbed up the lists of the greatest horror films ever made, and then the greatest films of any kind. The very qualities that confused people in 1980, the coldness, the slowness, the refusal to explain, turned out to be what kept the film alive long after warmer movies had faded. It crept up on the wider world the same way it creeps up on a person watching it, and it never left. All of King's complaints, gathered together, quietly reveal the same thing. King wrote a tragedy. Kubrick made a nightmare. A tragedy is a sad story about a person who might have been saved, a good soul brought down by a flaw or a force, told so that the audience loves him first and then grieves his fall. It keeps warmth at its center, because the grief only works if the love came before. King's book is exactly that, a tragedy about a father and a family and a sickness and a haunted house, built carefully to break the reader's heart. Everything King wanted from the film, the slow fall, The warmth, the love, the rescue at the end is what a tragedy needs in order to do its work on a person. A nightmare works in the opposite direction. In a bad dream, there is no good person to slowly lose, because the dread is already there from the very first moment, hanging over everything before anything has even happened. In a nightmare, the people around the dreamer often feel cold and strange and far away, hard to reach, not quite themselves. A nightmare does not explain itself. It hands over no clear reason for the fear, no sickness to name, no single cause to point at. It does not offer a warm ending where someone is saved and the evil is finally destroyed. It simply locks a person inside the dread and then refuses to let them back out. Every single thing King hated about the film turns out to be one of these very qualities. The father who is wrong from the start is the dread that arrives before any cause. The cold, distant family is the strange, unreachable feeling of people seen in a dream. The missing reasons are the way a nightmare never explains itself to anyone. The ending with no rescue is the dream that simply has no morning waiting at the end of it. King's own comparison, the beautiful car with no engine, ends up naming the exact thing that makes the film so frightening. An engine is the reason a car moves, the cause hidden underneath the motion. A tragedy has an engine, a clear chain of reasons that drives the story from a good man down to a ruined one. And that chain is what lets the audience understand the fall and grieve it. A nightmare has no engine at all. It has no clear cause, no chain of reasons, no motor a person can point to and make sense of. Things simply happen, dreadful and unexplained, and the missing reason is itself a large part of the terror. When King says the film is a beautiful body with nothing running inside it, he is describing, without meaning to, the exact feeling of a nightmare, a thing that moves and frightens with no engine of reason underneath. What he names as the film's great failure is the very quality that makes it feel like a dream a person cannot wake from. Once a person understands this divide, the whole film quietly reorganizes itself. The flat, cold way the family speaks, which feels at first like a weakness, becomes the unreachable distance of a dream. The father seeming off from the very beginning, which feels like a clumsy mistake, becomes the way dread soaks a nightmare before any reason arrives. The refusal to explain the ghosts and the hotel and the visions, which feels like a hole in the story, becomes the way a bad dream never bothers to make sense. The flaws a person sees when the film is measured against the warm tragedy King wrote all turn into strengths the moment it is measured as a dream. Nothing about the film changes. Only the standard changes. And under the right standard, every supposed failure becomes part of the design. This single choice, a story or a dream, sits underneath every other choice in the whole film. The gliding camera that follows like a quiet presence chose the dream over the story. The borrowed music that fills the air with sourceless dread chose the dream over the story. The crooked building, the objects that will not hold still, the doubled children, the mind shrunk down to one repeated sentence, the flood of blood, the fear that was partly real, the photograph that loops the father back to a party from before his birth. All of it is Kubrick choosing the logic of a nightmare over the warmth of a tragedy, again and again at every level of the film. King's long anger names the one decision that all the others grow out of. He wanted the warm, sad story he had written. Kubrick wanted a bad dream, and he built one out of every single tool he had. Neither man was foolish, and neither was simply right. King knew exactly what he had written and exactly what he wanted from it, and he had every reason to mourn its loss. Kubrick knew exactly what he was reaching for. and exactly what he was leaving behind. And he reached for it without apology. They were two careful artists who wanted two different things from the same set of bones. One a story to break the heart, the other a dream to chill the blood. The long argument between them, carried on for decades mostly by King alone, was never really about a chair moved here or a room number changed there. It was about whether this story should make a person grieve or make a person afraid. King is not wrong, and that deserves to be said plainly. The film is not a faithful telling of his book. It does throw away the warmth, the slow fall, the strong mother, the saved child, the redemption at the end. As a version of his story, it fails on purpose, and his anger about that loss is more than fair. And yet the film became something his book could never have been. The closest thing the movies have ever made to a recorded nightmare, a bad dream pinned to film and played back the same way every time. Both of these things are true at once. King lost the story he loved, and the world gained a nightmare it cannot shake loose. The very coldness that broke his heart is the reason the film still frightens people decades later, in a way that warmer, kinder, more faithful horror almost never manages to reach. Everything traced across these chapters, the moving camera, the wrong music, the impossible rooms, the restless objects, the doubles, the looping mind, the bleeding hotel, the real fear, the trapped man in the photograph. And now the cold heart underneath all of it points toward one last question, the one this journey has been circling. There is a reason a film made more than 40 years ago still works on people like a dream they once had and cannot quite forget. And there is a reason this particular nightmare refuses, after all this time, to ever fully let anyone who watches it wake up. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.